Hi, I'm Robert Shea, National Managing Principal of Public Policy at Grant Thornton. We're all laser focused on the upcoming election and its implications not only for policy, but for the economy. And I'm so proud to be joined today by Diane Swonk, Grant Thornton's chief economist. Diane, everyone views COVID-19 as the crucial issue this election season. And in fact, I was looking at some recent polls, Pew, Gallup, and they concur this is the number one issue on the minds of electorate as they go to the polls. And I know you agree we've got to get a handle on the virus, but tell us why you think it's so important. What impacts are you seeing now, and what does winter look like?
Mix up the cart and the horse and put the cart in front of the horse on COVID. They think lockdowns themselves are the cause of all of our problems, and we may be able to do more targeted lockdowns. But the bottom line is the course of the virus determines the course of the economy. We've seen time and time again, right, even before we actually had one state go into lockdown, we lost 1.4 million jobs in the U.S. economy as consumers and firms pulled back from congregating, meeting in person, going to conferences, canceling travel plans, not showing up at restaurants, and even canceling their doctors and dental appointments for fear of contagion. That fear that we have out there, particularly among baby boomers, which account for about a third of consumer spending, actually, when they pull back, it really has a very damaging effect on the U.S. economy. And so I think it's very important to understand that every time we see cases surge, we saw it before cases ever surged, but then as we saw cases surge again in late June and early July, we saw that pullback again in economic activity, most notably by baby boomers and up, which are the most susceptible to the worst outcomes of COVID-19. But that's why it's so critical to manage the course of the virus, because it has such a visceral effect on our behaviors.
How important is it that we get an economic stimulus bill done before or right around the election?
It's really crucial, and economists are almost unified on this. It's really been unusual to see, no matter what their stripes are or their ideology, how important and how unique this crisis is from other crises. And I'm an old deficit hawk, and it's at negative real interest rates. We can't afford not to do additional stimulus right now, because not only are the millions upon millions that are still unemployed running on fumes, they are now in food insecurity, which is a fancy way to say that they're hungry. 10.5% of adults can't feed themselves or their families for a week. That's a record high, and it's getting worse. It's moved up considerably since the previous supplements to unemployment insurance and stimulus checks have lapsed, and people have used up the saving from those generous supplements we saw earlier in the cycle. So we're going into a period of time where we're seeing cases surge again. Many have since day one been worried about the second wave or the second surge. It's actually our third wave, be worse than all the others. And it does look like it's going that way. Europe is well ahead of us on this curve, and it's not looking good. That's really important to understand, because you're going to be pulling the ground out from many restaurants and businesses that just can't operate because of how dangerous it is to get the virus indoors, to go indoors and to congregate as the virus is surging, and that natural behavioral effect that we see. I've often said that COVID is the iceberg. If we don't want to be the Titanic, we need lifeboats in the waters with supplies to diverse COVID-tainted waters, and we're still really deep in those waters today.
Vivid imagery indeed. Let's talk about, hypothetically, we get it done. What are some of the immediate benefits, and the flip side? What are the downsides if we don't?
Well, let's hope on the first one. I've been holding my breath, and I'm sure you have too, until I almost turn blue. But I'm willing to turn blue if it gets us over the finish line on this. I think it's really important is if we get the 1.9 trillion they're discussing, we could see actually the U.S. economy hit its previous peak in economic activity that we hit in the fourth quarter of 2019 in 2021. By mid-2021. That's stunning. But that would really be important, because not only would we be able to unleash the pent-up demand once we get past the phase of vaccines, more testing, tracing, and treatments that make this more manageable. On the flip side of it, if we do nothing and get nothing from here on out, it really is a pretty dire situation. Not only do we slip into yet another contraction in the fourth and first quarters, and it could be even worse than expected because it's getting global in scope. The pandemic, again, the second surge is getting global in scope, but it also means we risk the recession that we're in, which is unique, a COVID-related recession, be metastasizing or morphing into a more traditional and long-lived recession. And there's a risk it could become more of a financial crisis. We've got permanent business closures are accelerating. Bankruptcies are picking up. People not being able to pay rent and mortgages, that having a fallback on their landlords and banks. We're also seeing the commercial real estate sector in quite duress right now. So all of that gets so much worse, and we don't recuperate our previous peak in employment until well into 2024. And that's an optimistic scenario. So, I mean, I assume that we will have enough incentives out there to pass something. And that's assuming nothing, that we could really go down a rabbit hole here. I sort of have a hard time even writing about it because with every number, there's a person behind these figures. People forget about that when we talk about people who are infected and the people who've lost their jobs. Each one of these is a story and a life. And I think that gets lost in translation, especially working from home like we all are right now. There's a behavioral effect of that it makes those who are working from home much more insulated from the actual effects of this recession. It's not just a low-wage recession. The unemployment rate for 25 and over is higher today than it was during the Great Recession. Yet many people who work from home are not seeing their colleagues marched out en masse in layoffs like they would have if they'd been in the office. And that gives us yet a further sense of disconnect between the actual real pain that this economy is suffering.
I would say that we're really close and we're likely to come to agreement and that something would get done right up to the election. You know, the Congress would really like to wrap up a Supreme Court nominee confirmation and get back home to campaign. They can get things done pretty quickly.
So asking you, turning this back on you, Robert, does that mean we do get something before the election? And if we don't get that rosy scenario, what's the likelihood that in the lame duck session that follows that we'll get something done in the immediate aftermath of the recession that's retroactive?
If the Congress and the administration agree, things can be done pretty quickly. And committees in the Congress are working right now on the specific draft language that would make up the stimulus. Right now we're in a period of certainty. Once we have an election, so many balls are in the air that we're not quite sure what it'll look like after that. So the prospects vary widely depending on a bunch of different scenarios. If Vice President Biden is elected, I'm not sure what incentives the president has to agree to something other than that it's for the good of the country. I think that changes a little bit if the president's reelected. But then if the Democrats gain control of the Senate, they may want to wait for a more favorable environment when they take office. So it's hard to believe that these are calm waters we're in compared to what we may enter post-election.
It's sort of stunning to me when you talk about these scenarios because I'm thinking of people who can't pay for food for a week today. And between now and the next president, whoever it may be, getting inaugurated is an eternity for those households. What do you think? I'm looking at the packages. I'm seeing 1.9 trillion being tossed about. What are they sort of coming together on in terms of agreement, in terms of what is in those packages, that package that could be done before the election?
Right. There's agreement on stimulus checks. There's agreement on unemployment benefits, though at what level is not clear and what requirements are tied to those benefits. There'll be plenty of money for the healthcare industry. And I think the administration and Congress have come together on a testing strategic plan because I think that gets to the heart of what you said is that until we get a handle on the virus, we can't really work on the economy. And so that's really important there. State and local funding and liability protections seem to be the sticking points.
Let's do a couple different scenarios. What does it look like with the president still in office, the Senate still as it stands, what kind of package is likely, or is it contingent on what the economy is actually doing by January to see what we get?
Yeah. The way you're describing the economy makes it hard for me to believe that we need greater incentives. But as you schooled me, though it's not a good indicator of the economy, our policymakers tend to track closely the stock market. So I think a precipitous stock market decline in advance of the holidays would incentivize action. Further deterioration in other sectors, the collapse of the airline industry, for instance, I can't imagine it gets worse than it is today, but continued clamoring from large swaths of industry that policymakers get something done could produce action.
I will end it on that note with you, Robert. Always a pleasure to talk with you, and your insights have been so valuable in what we're doing as well. And I am hoping you are right.